When a lot of people think about difficult or challenging games, you don't necessarily always think about puzzle games. And the puzzle genre has grown in leaps and bounds over the last 15-20 years in many interesting ways. And for today's critical thought, we're going to discuss why, in the right hands, puzzle games can be harder than even the most infamous Dark Souls, Doom clones, or Kaizo games. The puzzle market has changed a lot, and a lot of that has come from the independent space, with of course the likes of Braid, Space Chem, Manifold Garden, Talos Principle, the Swapper, and so many more. Up there in the corner is the game Filament, which if I actually solve anything in that bit of footage I'm playing, that will be a miracle in of itself. And when many people again think about puzzle games, they think about casual games, Candy Crush, something like Tetris, Dr. Mario, games that people don't expect to spend a lot of time on, or they don't think there's a lot to them. But good puzzle design is a very tricky genre to do properly, despite all the many games that have been released over the last 10 years. And a part of that has been kind of the changing structure of puzzle design and what makes puzzle games oftentimes very frustrating to play. So, to begin with, one of the big things that kind of led to the rise or the growth of the puzzle market has been just an overall growth in terms of presentation. That it's not just here's 100 rooms of puzzles, do them. There's now a lot of these games having story, or a general narrative, a connection between rooms and situations. Portal probably being one of the first and most well known examples of that, as anyone with cake knows why. But we've seen some puzzle games go for existential or philosophical discussions, like the Talos Principle or the Swapper. We've seen some go for horror. We've seen emotional journeys, such as with puzzle platforming and Celeste. And there's just a lot of space for developers to explore in this territory that we really didn't see until the past, 10, maybe 12 years ago. And this goes a long way towards elevating the genre. Again, having an environment that's not just puzzle room to puzzle room to puzzle room, it does a lot to make these places feel grander than they are. And it helps to motivate someone to keep playing beyond just, hey, I did 20 puzzles, let's do another 700 more. Now, one of the major aspects involving or revolving around puzzle design has been essentially two unique schools of thought. And for those of you watching this, we are not going to be discussing the adventure genre, because that is a little bit different in terms of puzzle design and philosophy. But when we talk about puzzle games in general, there are two distinct categories of puzzle design, and we can basically break this down into linear and non-linear puzzles. A linear puzzle means that there is one and only one solution. This is a very black and white scenario. I solve the puzzle, the door opens. I don't solve a puzzle, I'm stuck there until I do. And Filament up there is definitely an example of a linear puzzle. In this aspect, you are dealing with essentially all the elements are locked to their respective puzzle rooms. So I'm not essentially taking anything from one room to the next. And a lot of linear puzzle games are built just along those lines. That the main character or the player control character themselves doesn't really have a lot of functionality. It could be just walk and jump, maybe one unique move, and even puzzle platformers can feature linear puzzles if the jumping is designed to be basically like a fixed height and fixed moment, or a fixed momentum. Now, with that said, when we talk about the other side, non-linear, things are a little bit different. When it comes to nonlinear puzzles, This is a different kind of design. It kind of leads into emergent gameplay. Here, it's not so much about you having a pass or fail. It's that you can come up with a solution, but can you come up with a better solution? And how these games work is that typically the beginning and end conditions are the same. There is a set goal for the player to achieve. How they do that is entirely up to them. And with a game such as Opus Magnum in the corner there, what happens is that the player is bringing essentially the tools and the mechanics to solve the puzzles with them from puzzle to puzzle. So that it's not a case that, oh, I can only use the swapper piece on, puzzle B. Instead, I have all these various tools, all these various ways of solving the puzzle, and I have to figure out how to build a solution out of them. So, in one respect, this is a lot harder to do compared to, say, a linear puzzle. On the other hand, it opens up these games to far more or far greater thought and ingenuity behind them compared to a game where they say you must do it this way or you're not solving it. Now, nonlinear puzzle design is very unique, and there aren't as many examples of this that really come to my mind. The big ones, of course, would be from Zachtronics, who did, of course, Space Chem, Infinifactory, Shenzhen IO, and a few other games. If you can think of other titles that made use of emergent gameplay or nonlinear puzzle solving, let me know in the comments. But nonlinear and linear puzzle designs are both essential when it comes to thinking about the kind of puzzles you want to make. And they have different aspects to them. If we're talking about a linear puzzle, this makes it a lot easier to create a set or unique set of circumstances to teach and guide the player. One of the big problems that nonlinear games have is that it's very hard to onboard the player when anything could be a solution. And these games typically fall to that same issue of, we're going to teach you how to use each tool in a very specific manner, and then the game is about using them in completely off-the-wall and esoteric ways that you would never know about on your own. And this is both the good and the bad about nonlinear design. That when the player does figure out and they get that aha moment, it is a great feeling. But if they don't get it, and they're not figuring it out, it becomes amazingly frustrating, and it may basically just repel them from ever playing that game again. And onboarding when it comes to puzzle design is in of itself its own challenge. And we spoke about this when we talked about grand strategy and 4X games, but the same rules apply here. That when the means to play the game are open-ended, and there is no set path or no set way to look at it, you can't really go by just general gameplay or organic tutorial to figure things out. But likewise, if you give the player too much information, then you're just basically solving every puzzle for them. Saying that if you see a purple piece shaped like an L, you do this. If you see a red piece that has a 0 in it, do this. And Zachtronics games are unfortunately very notorious not only for being very complicated, but also having very low clear rates. And there have been people who have stopped playing his games within minutes. I've even spoke to him about this. There are people who bought his game, and they never even managed to beat the tutorial. And while that may sound like it should be a joke, it is very serious when it comes to the onboarding and just keeping people invested in these games. And after this quick break, we're going to talk more about when players hit that wall and why it can just nosedive an entire experience for a player. And now for a quick shout out to our current Game Wisdom supporters and sponsors. Going forward, all Patreon supporters will get early access to our videos. And if you'd like to continue this discussion on game design, be sure to check out our Discord channel, linked down below. If you're looking for more wisdom about game design, be sure to check out my latest offering of books, 20 Essential Games to Study, aimed for first-time developers and students looking for some inspiration for their upcoming games, and Game Design Deep Dive Platformers if you're interested in anything regarding 2D and 3D platforming design. They're both available in print, digital, and wherever books are being sold. Ultimately, the problem when it comes to puzzle design and philosophy in video games has to do with the idea of hitting the wall. That moment when you are just hopelessly and utterly stuck, and there's just no way to get around it. And this is oftentimes the death nail for just about any puzzle experience. And the problem is what this wall means in a puzzle game versus an action or skill focused title. When we play a game like Devil May Cry, Ninja Gaiden, first person shooters like Doom, and so on, that when you get stuck at a hard section, there's always room for improvement. You can see what you're doing wrong. Maybe you're not dodging fast enough. Maybe you're not properly getting the timing for attacking enemies. Maybe you're not reading the enemies right. And you can see and track that growth. It's why when you play these games, it is such a rewarding feeling when you finally beat that boss in Dark Souls. In a puzzle game, however, there is no real growth or training that goes into play in these games because these solutions are often black and white. Either it works or it doesn't. And there's no way to kind of square that circle. This is not like an action game or like another title where you can have a narrow victory. You can't say in a puzzle game, oh, let me only solve 60% of it and that's good enough and we can move on. Now, with that said, there have been some puzzle games that have gone for, the 1-star, 2-star, 3-star solutions. And with something like Infinifactory and Zachtronics' games with their histograms, there is no such thing as a true solution, the perfect solution that works, because it's entirely up to you to build it. But again, the problem lies with understanding the concepts and the methodology of solving these puzzles. If you're not figuring out, you're not understanding how to utilize these tools or what the mechanics of the puzzle demand, there's nothing you can do otherwise within the game to figure it out. And Zachtronics' games are really good examples of this, because they are built on kind of understanding the different utilities and dynamics of your various blocks and tools. When we talk about programming-based puzzles, for instance, that you can design a puzzle or you can design a solution that just works and it's very cumbersome. But oftentimes, once you figure out kind of the underlying systems and rules, you can go back and make a more optimal solution. But therein lies the problem. That implies that the player knows what's going on and can change and adapt to it. When we talk about puzzle games, however, there's always that line between how much do you tell the player about how things work and how much you want them to figure it out on their own. Because with a game like Infinifactory or any kind of emergent or brain-teasing based design, if you leave too much to the player to figure out and they can't, then they are going to become hopelessly stuck. And when that happens, there is nothing that they can do other than to look up the solution. And if a player needs to do that, then that is a failure of the game or a breaking down. Because as we see with a lot of puzzle designs, they are always built off of the previous puzzle, whether it's a chain of puzzles or just the overall game entirely. If I can't figure out what you want me to do in puzzle 2 for whatever reason, if those elements are expanded or used in a later puzzle, well, I'm stuck there as well. And this is why you have to be really careful when it comes to open-ended design, such as with a Monsters Expedition, Steven Sausage Roll, and games like that, where if the player is not understanding these rules or not getting the logical order of growth, they're going to become even more confused at the game. And I have footage of me failing at Steven's Sausage Roll that we could show that's just me fumbling around for an hour trying to play that game. And when people get that frustrated, they may attempt to brute force it, but more often than not, they're just going to give up. And this is why you need to be very considerate in terms of onboarding the player and keeping them invested in the game, whether it is by exploration, story, or having the means to help them if they are hopelessly stuck in this game. Because we've seen some games, such as from Arthix Mundi, and other in the examples, that allow you to skip or bypass a puzzle if you're hopelessly stuck at it. And while that is kind of the, nuclear or, last-ditch solution, you ultimately want the player to feel like they are learning these tools. And it is so much harder than it sounds, and why the drop-off rate for puzzle games is so high. There are puzzle games such as Infinite Factory and the other titles from Zachtronics that people have stopped playing them before they could even figure out the tutorial of these games. And while that may sound like a joke, it really isn't. And player drop-off rate is a huge topic and one we need to talk about in a later piece. To wrap things up, puzzle design may look like it's a casual genre or something that's not too hard to figure out, but it is anything but. And making a solid puzzle game that is interesting, that rewards the player for learning it, and can still keep them motivated for hours or how many dozens, if not hundreds of puzzles you have, is very difficult. I've also shown some footage of Baba Is You and me failing in that one as well. And the design of these games is not something we often talk about, despite how interesting and unique the genre is. And we've seen the developers make some very crazy puzzle games, as we've mentioned so far. To wrap things up, can you think of some really solid puzzle games that we have not discussed? Either good, bad, or in the middle? Let me know in the comments below, and once again, check out our Discord and Patreon link down below, and come back for daily discussions on game design here, and on game wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoy things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel link down below, where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it. And tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.